Because I have a great team of correspondents and guests here to break it all down. Shannon Pettypiece is a White House reporter for Bloomberg News. Brett Stevens, an MSNBC political contributor and op-ed columnist for the New York Times. Eddie Glaude, an MSNBC contributor and professor at the College of New Jersey, otherwise known as Princeton. But I got to start with NBC's intelligence and national security reporter, Ken Delaney. And Ken, there's a lot to go through, and I need to put it out there. Deutsche Bank, I worked there from 2002 to 2011. I mean, it's noteworthy that we even look at Deutsche Bank. After the 1998 Russia crisis, Deutsche was the only bank to stay in Russia. Everyone retreated and came home. So their ties in Russia cannot be overstated. They are so closely tied as far as the banking community goes. And you have to remember Wilbur Ross, who served as vice chair of the Bank of Cyprus, put Deutsche Bank's chairman, Joseph Ackerman, on the board of the Bank of Cyprus. The Bank of Cyprus then sold their Russian business to a Russian banker tied to Vladimir Putin. And remember, in the Paul Manafort investigation, he and Rick Gates allegedly have laundered money through banks in Cyprus. It's pretty smoky. Tell us what you know.
And so with that context, obviously there's been long suspicions about Donald Trump's relationship with this bank. They lent money to him when no one else would lend money to him. But then after the financial crash, he stiffed them on a huge loan. There was a lawsuit. They settled the lawsuit. Then the private wealth division lent him even more money at a time when there was a Russian money laundering scheme going on at the bank that the bank later paid a fine for. I don't believe they admitted wrongdoing. But so obviously there's huge suspicions around this. But at a minimum, Stephanie, this shows that Robert Mueller is poking into Donald Trump's finances, because that's where you learn about Donald Trump's money. You go to his bank, right? Without
a doubt. And we should note, Deutsche Bank in a statement today said, you know, they've been subpoenaed. They're giving those records forward. And they said, we always cooperate with investigations around the world. I want to note that back in May, House Democrats asked Deutsche Bank to submit records of President Trump's business ties with them. They also asked for documentation around the $10 billion that had moved from Russia that Deutsche Bank facilitated, that they then paid a fine on. Deutsche did not comply. There wasn't a subpoena. So to say that we always cooperate, you always cooperate when you have a subpoena. And you kind of have to. Shannon, I want to share what President Trump said in July during an interview with the New York Times.
Mueller was looking at your finances, your family's finances, unrelated to Russia. Is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual...
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
So that was the New York Times reporter speaking to President Trump. And Trump saying that's crossing a red line. If Mueller goes into his personal and family business, that's a red line. Well, guess what? Line's red. What are we going to do? He's in there.
Exactly. Stephanie, I think this is one of the most, it could potentially be one of the biggest developments in this case. I mean, I try not to overreact about things, but I feel like it really could because of this red line. When we first reported back in July that Mueller was looking into the business, Trump's lawyer, John Dowd, was very clear that that was beyond the scope of the mandate, that that was outside of Mueller's reach. So the president's lawyers had said since then that the businesses weren't being looked at. The president wasn't under investigation. Well, here we have one more report very clearly and specifically about what Mueller's looking at.
You know, it was funny. Earlier today, Joe Scarborough brought up that months ago, when Trump first won, he said, Trump, do not mess with the intelligence agencies. You do not want to have them as your enemy. This won't go well for you. And at the time, I went to go see a big investor who at the time supported Trump. And he said, if Trump pushes too far and they start to get into his businesses, this will be bad news for President Trump. He's led a sloppy business over the years. So it doesn't necessarily say there's definitely something here with Russia, but it's dicey if you get into a man's businesses who's been bankrupt 4 times. How do you continue to have developments when you don't have any lenders except one bank? I got to ask you about Paul Manafort.
6 times, by the way.
6 times. Thank God Brett's here. Paul Manafort. After all that's gone down, there he is at home spending Thanksgiving, wants to go to Florida for winter, and in his free time, ghostwrites an op-ed with a Russian. Hello? What happened?
And what's significant about this, Stephanie, is so Mueller's prosecutors are now trying to revoke this bail deal they had with Manafort. And the reason is because they're saying this Russian had ties to Russian intelligence. And this is really the first time that anyone has accused a former member of the Trump team of having direct ties to somebody linked to Russian intelligence. They didn't specify who it was, but Manafort has a longtime protege, a man named Kalimnik, who he was involved in these these exchanges with Oleg Deripaska during the campaign. Remember when he was offering private briefings to this Russian oligarch? So now it turns out potentially there was a guy linked to Russian intelligence in the middle of all that. Very significant.
Oleg Deripaska, king of aluminum. Eddie, why would Paul Manafort do this? I mean, at the very least, if he wants to get his message out, he doesn't need to do it himself. Someone else can.
I have no idea, to be honest with you. It actually is evidence of how profoundly arrogant these folks are.
That's a good point.
That there's a sense that they inhabit the world without any belief that there are constraints on their behavior. And so Paul Manafort believes, I think, and this is evidence to prove this, I believe, that he can do anything he wants to do. Well, it seems like Mueller is suggesting otherwise. And what we see here too, as well, in the broader question, is that it's not just obstruction, it's not just collusion, right? It's the money. The money is at the heart of this stuff. And so a lot of folks are really, really nervous right now.
Yeah, Brett, how do you read
the name
all
of this movie is No Way Out, and it stars Kevin Costner. Look, somehow this behavior, especially when it comes to the question of money, his finances, reminds me of the behavior of rogue regimes when they're faced with nuclear inspectors. They say, you can go
that's not worrisome.
You can go anywhere you want in our country, but you can't go to this particular military installation. And what Donald Trump is effectively saying is, oh, by all means, have an investigation, but you can't look at my finances. You can't look at my tax returns. That's a no-go zone. That's beyond the scope of your investigation. Of course it has to be about the money. Donald Trump Jr. said on the record in 2008 a large portion of their business was in Russia. A major question is what sort of business ambitions did the Trump organization have in Russia after the election, assuming that he would lose it, and what were his ties to groups like the Bayrock Group, whose leading members all had former Soviet ties? Those are obvious questions for any special counsel to ask. It is that no-go military
The Bayrock
zone.
Group, their partner in the Trump Soho Hotel, which the Trump family is now disassociating themselves with. But even Don Jr. and Ivanka were in hot water with that hotel years ago. Questions about misrepresenting how many of the apartments in it had been sold. Now, it's important to note, though, these things could all be facts, but not connected. Deutsche Bank has looser lending practices than other banks, so the Kushner family could do business with them. Russia could do business with them, and the Trumps could do business with them, but they may not be tied.
That's right. And just want to button up something Brett said. Every prosecutor that we've ever talked to about this investigation believes that Robert Mueller has Donald Trump's tax returns. So this is absolutely a part of his investigation, Donald Trump's finances.
All right. I want to also ask you about, or Shannon, let's turn to you. What is your take on all of this? From the Bloomberg side, many people in the finance world are saying this is just business. Nothing will come of it.
And as you were pointing out, maybe it is just business. Maybe the Trump org and the family, they take money from anyone who would give it for them. They were in the real estate business. If a bunch of Russians wanted to buy their apartments, go ahead. It doesn't necessarily mean it has anything to do with collusion. But we have seen that Mueller is willing to bring charges against someone that aren't related to collusion when you look at Paul Manafort and all the money laundering charges that he's facing. So when you open up the book, you don't know what you're going to find. If you walks in there and sees something that's not related to Russia but's illegal, he's not necessarily going to just say, oh, never mind, I won't look over there.
We should also point out that when asked, I believe by Lester Holt, President Trump very clearly but cleverly said, no, I don't have any investments in Russia. No one thought President Trump invested his money in Russia. The question was, have Russians lent him money? All right, I want to ask about KT McFarland. Ken, to you. There's new drama surrounding former Trump transition official and National Security Advisor Assistant KT McFarland. What is all this about?
So we learned in the court documents with the Flynn plea that KT McFarland was coordinating with Flynn. Well, actually, the documents didn't mention her, but through our reporting, we learned she knew about his outreach to the Russian ambassador during the transition about sanctions. And then the New York Times added to that by reporting on some emails from her. And it's clear that other people in the Trump orbit knew. Now we learned that she actually testified to Congress back in July that she had no recollection. Actually, she said, I'm not aware of any contacts between Trump members and Russians back during this period. So there's a great inconsistency there, and people on the Hill want to know what her explanation is for that.
How do conservatives explain this? Are they making the argument it would be normal during the transition time for any team to speak to other countries?
You know, I remember back in 1990, 1991, Jimmy Carter was doing some freelance diplomacy on the eve of the war in Kuwait. And the Bush administration, the senior Bush administration, seriously thought about charging or threatening former President Carter with the Logan Act, because there is a rule in this country that we have one president at a time. Now, it happened that, at least in one case, the Obama administration was doing something I didn't like politically, which is it was allowing a resolution against Israel that I opposed. Nonetheless, it is the constitutional right, even of a presidency in its final days, to conduct the foreign policy of the United States without interference. And what conservatives will say is, well, of course, but they were doing sort of preparatory work because they're about to come into office. But this wasn't preparatory work. This wasn't, you know, let me get to know you. This was help us obstruct a goal of an outgoing administration. And what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. No Republican administration would want an incoming Democratic administration to do this. So Republicans should take this seriously. People say it's the Logan Act. It's 218 years old. It's still a law in the books.
And the concern is whether or not this is quid pro quo. Right? Why, not just simply with regards with Israel, it's with regards to the sanctions against Russia that the Obama administration has levied. So for me, it's not the Nixon question, what did you know and when did you know it? The question is, why did you lie and why are you continuing to lie?
And
that's
did
the
Donald
question.
Trump know you were lying?
And did Donald Trump know you were lying? Those are the questions.
Quickly, before we move on, Shannon, what's the word out of the White House? Yesterday, John Dowd, Trump's personal lawyer, was making the argument there can't be obstruction of justice around Trump tweeting that he fired Michael Flynn because he lied to the FBI. And then later, we know he wanted to fire James Comey. Yesterday, John Dowd said Trump can't have obstruction of justice. And then it sounded like last night Ty Cobb either walked that back or distanced himself from that argument. So what's the word out of the Trump camp on this?
Well, it certainly seemed like they were starting to take a much broader interpretation of executive powers by saying the president can't obstruct justice. Before that, the line had been the president hadn't obstructed justice. He didn't tell Flynn or Comey to drop the Flynn case. He didn't fire Comey because of the Russia investigation. That he didn't. Now it's he can't. So there was an evolution of that. It's been a very odd 48 hours for the president's legal team. I mean, with the tweets, with the Dowd comment, with the Ty Cobb's comment, they need to get on the same page here. There's a lot of inconsistency that's been going on.
Shannon's generous. It's been an odd 48 hours. It's been an odd 4 to 8 months. Last point.
One quick point. So there's a man who believes that the president can't obstruct justice. His name is Jeff Sessions, because he voted to impeach Bill Clinton on that very charge.
We're in Nixon territory. When the president does it, that means it's legal. When you're in Nixon territory, you're in danger.
Wow. All right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.